𝐓𝐚𝐤𝐬𝐧𝐠 is Executive Director of Amara Raja Batteries. He graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in a degree in biochemistry and initially joined the Amara Raja Group in 2013 as a management executive, where he undertook various functional responsibilities across this business. Later, he held important positions within the group, including Managing Director and CEO of Amara Raja Power Systems and Managing Director of Amara Raja Electronics. Today, we chat with Vikram on our program to talk about Amara Raja Group. Vikram, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Rohan. Great to be here.
Vikram, first up, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're a young lad, having seen the world, been in the US, decided to come back to the family business. How's that entire journey been? Are you missing the United States or happy to be back?
I think the short answer first is I'm very happy to be back. I wouldn't really call it being back because I didn't spend most of my youth here. I was born in India, went at a very young age, hardly months. I was about 2-3 months the first time we went to the US, and then by the time I was 9 months, we more or less settled there. So I think I came to India when I was 23. So while it's technically coming back, I didn't really spend enough time here to ever really, understand or embrace every aspect of it. But I think it's really great to be here. And I think when I came back to India around 2013, it was a great time to be in India, and it wasn't the best time to be in the United States. I think there's a lot of things that are changing. Job market wasn't great. They were going through their own challenges, whereas India, I think, has just been on like a unimpeded growth story for the last, at least as long as I've been here, and I've been coming back every summer as a kid. So the amount of opportunity that's being presented here, I think it kind of overwrites anything I regret about having left. I miss small things, but I think overall I'm very happy to be here. And I think the journey here was great because while I came, fresh from the United States, almost everything around that time, 2013, 2014, India was also happening fresh for the first time, right? New technologies were getting introduced. I think what I found is, since I've been a kid and keep coming back every summer to India, maybe once upon a time, the lag between something being released in other parts of the world and coming to India may have been, years. Now it's like days and seconds, right? Everything's happening at the same time. So when we're talking about this massive journey of going to electric mobility, in many ways, we're ahead of the United States, right? Maybe we don't have our Teslas and stuff, but the advantage of having this light local mobility scene that's happening very quietly. But even when I just came back from a trip to China, they're also astounded in how quickly the two-wheeler, three-wheeler space in niche areas in India are electrifying. So I think in many ways, we are going to be leaders in certain select segments in this area.
That's a great answer, and I have to agree with you. I was at EVS 36, the world's biggest EV charging show, which was in California last week, and I did get the distinct impression that in some pockets, India is ahead of America. And I completely agree with you. In the old days, maybe just 10 years ago, you had to wait months before something came to India, and now it's the other way around. In fact, some things come to India before they get to the rest of the world. So it's quite an exciting time, absolutely, to be not only just in India but also in the electric and clean mobility space. What is Amara Raja Group doing in this space? Now, you've been in the battery space for the longest time. You're one of India's largest lead-acid battery manufacturers, the mainstay of the battery industry in India. However, the lead-acid industry has taken its time to move to newer chemistries. And lithium was something that came almost by surprise. It was like the ICE industry with the EV in some ways. It took a Tesla to wake up the ICE industry to move to electric vehicles. And it seemed the same in lithium, didn't it? Because the traditional lead-acid battery manufacturers took a long time to open to lithium, and it was other manufacturers, either companies that were making their own electric cars or electric scooters that needed to make their own batteries, that moved on this space first, and then the mainstay of the industry followed. What has been the journey at Amara Raja looking at lithium and newer chemistries, whether it's sodium and beyond, maybe even graphite and superconductors, from your traditional lead-acid mainstay business?
So I'd say that our view has really, really changed about this over the last 3 to 5 years. I think earlier it was an advantage at the time. We were partnered with the largest lead-acid battery company in the world. It was a 26-26 JV between my family and Johnson Controls. So it was always we could always watch what JCI was doing around the world, follow them, and like I said earlier, it's like follow the leader approach. But I think as we started waiting longer and longer, and I'm happy to say we didn't wait too long. But the largest lead acid players in the world, like Johnson Controls, like Enersys, etc., some of the really big players, they never took the opportunity to try to make a strong pivot to newer technologies. So I think the theme of what we're doing is we're no longer trying to follow what the rest of the world is doing, especially in our industry. And I think by doing that, it's kind of fearlessly saying, there's a lot of risk. I don't know if lithium is a much, big boys game that we shouldn't be in, but we're going to attempt. And I don't think you'll find that many lead acid players around the world have actually taken the opportunity to try to pivot, right? So I can't say how successful we'll be, but right now we're not waiting. What we're saying is India's a unique situation. We have still a long road left in which we need lead acid batteries. For the automotive sector, no matter how quickly we're kind of penetrating in certain segments, cars, buses, other things, it takes some time. And even if we're getting to relatively strong penetration numbers 10 years from now, every ICE engine that's being deployed between now and then, it'll require a lifetime of support, right? It'll a replacement market. So we have that advantage where we still have some time to really, even grow slightly our existing business. But at the same time, we're taking a pretty large bet. And recently we announced in Telangana that we're going to be building our first kind of lithium facility. And 9,500 crores, if you really translate it to the larger picture around the world, what other countries and other companies are doing, it looks like a drop in the bucket. But actually for us, what it represents is we're investing almost double of what we've invested over the last 40 years in a single project. So I think we're embracing the fact that we have to take some risk and we have to kind of go ahead. And if anything, I think, I should also give them respect. Along with us, Exide Industries in India has also been very proactive in saying, listen, we're going to go make a big in lithium. So I believe that in that one way also, India will be a leader. Our lead acid companies are being much, much bolder than the rest of the world.
So Vikram, I have two questions on that. The first one is the elephant in the room. The 9,500 crores you're investing, is that a lithium cell manufacturing plant or a cell packing plant? Are you going to be making cells in India?
So the bulk of that is going to come from cell making. And I think right now we're showing an outlay of about 12 to 16 gigawatt hour of cell. And then in addition to that, we're going to be doing about 5 gigawatt hour of packing. I think the reason the pack number is much smaller is because, we expect that there'll be a bigger market like from OEMs and all to get our cells, but most of them will want to be doing packing and all in-house. So pack, I think we have to be a little bit more selective and see who's really willing to give that market to us. Of course, our stationary customers are quite keen to let us do it, but these days, even the two-wheeler and three-wheeler guys are questioning whether or not they should give that value addition to us or they want to do it in-house.
So we'll come back to that question of packing in a bit. But first up, you made the comment that around the world, the lead acid industry hasn't really taken the plunge into lithium. They've tended to stay in the rivers and streams that they used to, rather than searching waterfalls. You have, after taking some time to analyze the market and see which direction it's going. I'm interested, why is that the case? Does it have to do with the core competence and the skill sets because the chemistries and processes are so different? Is it because, if you're going to be in lithium, you have to be a big player, and so, your initial investment has to be at the scale you have committed to, which is 9,500 crores, and that scares away a lot of people. What is the reason that the lead acid industry has been reticent to embrace the new chemistries?
I think a lot of it has to do with just when you're so dominant and have an incumbent technology, it's not in your interest to kind of want to embrace it, right? I think even from an OEM angle, they fought it a lot more than, they embraced it until recently when they kind of decided that they have to go ahead and do it. And if I can just give like an illustration, one, I think a huge missed opportunity. And we tell them all the time, right? Even though we're not as closely associated anymore. At the time that the companies like LG, Samsung, the Koreans, the Japanese were making their investments and saying, let's go ahead and kind of, it's like a 20-year lost journey that they spent on lithium. And during that time, Johnson Controls, especially before they started doing a bit of restructuring, I think they got up to like 50, 60 billion in revenue. They're as big as any of those guys at that time, especially. And they actually were very proactive. They spent $200 million building the first kind of lithium cell facility. It's up in Michigan in the United States. And I think at that time, BMW was quite aggressive, saying, we need lithium batteries. Why don't you go ahead and build this for us? So they took an early bet, but then ultimately they just decided, okay, it's not making money. I'm used to making this much margin in lead. Why should I kind of burn cash? If they, now that I think about it, if they decided, for a decade, okay, that whatever loss I'm making on this lithium facility is not really significant to me, right? It's not changing my fortunes in any manner. if they stuck with it and they really said, let me just play this out and see how it goes, I have no doubt that Johnson Controls, with all the engineering prowess they had, they were people that every OEM in the world wanted to work with when they're launching a new platform, because they really understood vehicles, vehicle architecture. They could have been like an LG Chem, they could have been like a CATL. So that I think that's an very unfortunate, but the biggest missed opportunity in the lithium space. And that would have been a Western company with their own supply chains and global presence that have been able to do that. So I don't think there's a good reason, is what I would say, that lead acid players have shied away from this business.
You talked of a pivot, and your pivot was to go from lead acid to lithium, and then of course look at the EV value chain, which we will talk about in a second. But I think what makes India unique, and what also makes your company unique in many ways, is the fact that even though you're so big, you are able to pivot so rapidly as the technology change comes upon you. What is it that makes both India and maybe even your business to some extent, I think I have a clue as to why your business does it, but I'm interested in your perspective. What is it that allows Indian companies to be able to pivot and move so quickly when compared to, for example, you've just talked about JCI, but it's not JCI, isn't it? When you look at our industry, General Motors, Ford completely lost the race. If you look at all the battery companies, they've completely lost the race. We're talking about an entirely new brand of battery companies today, when it's Sony, Panasonic, CATL, Tesla, than we were in the past. So you're going to be up there, given the investments you've made, perhaps even given the investments Exide has made. What is it in India that makes it so different?
That's a great question. I think I'm a little slightly caught off guard. It's an out of syllabus question, but I think a lot of the companies you mentioned, they've just started to stagnate over time. Maybe they're victims of their own success. They've seen great times, and they think that once you believe you've made it, I think that's the day that everything starts to fall apart, right? The day you stop being hungry, the day you stop acting desperate for success. I find that even in our own individual situations, we start to kind of just relax and take it easy. So I think Indian companies, India as a country, we still feel we have yet to make it, right? We keep talking about the potential of India, but it's like it's not yet reached. So we still need to keep working for it. And I think as long as we keep that attitude and keep that hunger, desperation, we should say, right? That maybe this great attitude of being able to pivot and really move will continue.
Super. So Vikram, you talked about cell manufacturing as well as cell packing, and that's brilliant to see, right? A couple of questions on that. When are you going to go online? Most of the cell manufacturing in India comes online after 2025. What kind of time scale are you looking at? And the second question, in rejoining that, is what kind of dependence will you have on China for the supply chain on this? I know we can buy lithium from Australia, we can buy cobalt from Australia. There's places in South America that we can buy raw materials from. But are you delevering from China actively, or is that just a nonsense? The reality is they dominate, and we're going to be forced to deal with them, for the next decade.
So your second question is a fun one. I will definitely try to be as unfiltered as possible. But to start with, the cell manufacturing capacity, we're starting out with the phase 1, which is going to be a two-part kind of plant. One is going to be 2 gigawatt-hour of manufacturing, and mostly we're kind of going more with a two-wheeler type of cell, a 2170 proven NMC design. And during that time also, we may also build in a little bit of flexibility, slightly go higher on the cylindrical size as well. But the first part of this plant is going to be what we're calling our commercial qualification plant. So it's more like in the megawatt hour, 60 to 100 megawatt hour, depending on the cells we're making, but not really meant to be extremely efficient, but an extremely flexible line. So every time we want to kind of get a new cell out to our customer to get tested and do smaller batch kind of processing, that'll be the first thing. I think that if we can, keep pending some of the approvals and all that to take some of their own time, if we can get construction started in the next month or two, plus 18 months from then is when we want to get that line kind of commissioned and started, and 6 months after that. So let's say about 24 months to get 2 gigawatt manufacturing started off. And then every year we'll be adding some capacity to a terminal capacity of about 16 gigawatt hour by 2028. And the pack facility, of course, with also having a little bit of pressure to start up operations in this new location, get some employment generated. That I think we want to be a lot more aggressive. It's also a lot easier to do. So around March or April, we want to have the first kind of products coming out of those lines. To your second question, I think First, when we say like how dependent we'll be on China, I think the world has to be dependent on China because they've been the most proactive, right? They've been very, very. I think it's a very visionary kind of stance they've taken on cornering new materials, identifying what those new materials are that the world will require over the next, several decades. So when you think about the major things I'll have to buy, cathode active material, anode active material, separator, electrolyte, the foils. Whether or not it's a Chinese company or not, our end goal is that we want to source from India. So it can be MNCs coming in investing in India. That would be what we really try to strive for. But in the when we first start production, I really today we're not mapping more than like 25% from domestic value addition, and I think even that is not such an easy task. So when the production linked incentive went out and they're talking about you should reach 60%, 70% domestic value addition within this period, it'll be a challenge because I think unless Indian players or a couple of players really pool their demand to bring certain critical parts of the ecosystem to India during that time, it's not like we're the first investment destination at the moment because naturally China is the biggest market. Europe is investing very aggressively. The United States is investing very aggressively. So if anybody for any of these critical raw materials wants to invest, they'll naturally go where the demand is. We're not going to have such a big demand by 2030 compared to other parts of the world. So we will be quite dependent on China, or Chinese sources, I should say. And I don't think there's many ways that we can change that in the immediate future. We talk about some of the lithium finds we have in the northern parts of the country, but is it really realistic that any of those will be coming to market before 2028, 2030? Not likely, right? So I do celebrate in the background, but I don't think this is something that will change my fortunes anytime soon.
So you talked about NMC. So that's the chemistry that you've landed upon? I'm interested why NMC, and also from the perspective of our listeners, how easy is it for a company such as yours that has made this kind of investment, 9,500 crores? Do you need to really lock in a chemistry, or is your line flexible to make any sorts of chemistries as the market demands it? Or is your advocacy message then going to be, if you're not flexible, take the country down a particular road and a particular chemistry? That's the first one. And then the second question on the cell is there one form factor that you're making, or are you going to make all sorts of form factors, cylindrical, prismatic, pouch? And how have you done your analysis to arrive on what sort of form factor you should be making for India?
I'll just kind of write this down. So if we talk about chemistry, form factor, and also kind of let's say fungibility, right, in the flexibility in the plant. On the chemistry, actually our longer term roadmap sees us putting more on LFP. LFP is where we'll probably have more like 60-70% of our capacities by the end of this decade. But the reason we're kind of pushed a little bit more aggressive, let's have NMC and a small cylindrical cell as our first product, is because India, at least the next few years, where Amara Raja is extremely focused, is this light local mobility. So what's going to be the most kind of predominant cell that we think is going to go into a two-wheeler, because that's going to be the single biggest segment. And even at 2030, when the car market finally starts to kind of come alive, the two-wheeler market and the four-wheeler market are still going to be equal. After that, of course, it'll get outpaced very quickly because simply the size of packs in cars. So that's where we're a little bit focused right now. We want to come out with an NMC. I think also the form factor of 2170 cylindrical, it's a very well-established format. There's not a whole lot of recreating the wheel that we have to do, redesigning the wheel. So that's where we want to go a little bit more and get our feet wet with something that's pretty well established. And what's important for Amara Raja is our strength is not so much in core R&D and creating absolute things from scratch. Our strength is setting up extremely effective, efficient, high-quality manufacturing ecosystems. So I want to master this, from the mixing, coating, all the way to the end, 2 gigawatt-hour, and then be able to scale up from there. So definitely LFP is on our roadmap, and that'll be the larger part of our footprint going forward. And as for form factor, I think the basic kind of what we looked at is in something like lithium, what we're doing for the first time, the less complexity we can build into the system, which means less form factors, less chemistries. That's what we're shooting for. Now, ultimately, we do believe we have to take a dual chemistry approach. But when it comes to form factors, it's going to be predominantly between prismatic and cylindrical. Pouch, I think at this time, while every form factor has its pros and cons, it's something that we're not keen to kind of look at this point in time. The last thing I think you mentioned about the kind of the lines, how flexible we want to build them. I think one learning I've had as of late is, and obviously this changes every day, right? Something new comes, but building flexibility into lines is complex, and it's also quite, what do you say? It's not a very efficient process. So, for example, when you look at the kind of the end-to-end process of lithium cell making, when it comes to mixing, mixing and coating, it's an absolute no-no. You cannot build flexibility. So let's say for my commercial plant, which is I'm willing to do many changeovers, many cleanings and stuff, because it's not meant to be running 24/7. It's more of like a qualification plant. I can build in flexibility. But when I'm trying to run 2 GWh line, 4 GWh lines, you can't kind of do frequent switchovers between chemistries. So if you're having an LFP cathode line, that needs to be absolutely isolated, the HVAC system, everything. There can be no cross-contamination. Your anode line shouldn't have any cross-contamination. So I think we're not really trying to build flexibility. If ever we need to change out our mix, I think it'll be like a one-time complete system change, and then can continue from there. From the assembly, formation and all, that's more or less chemistry agnostic. So whether it's a LFP or an NMC, you're putting into the same form factor, same size, that we can build in fungibility. But everything else, I think we're more or less on day one, whatever bet we're taking, we should try to be as consistent as possible.
Since we're on the subject of chemistries, Vikram, one of the challenges in industries such as ours in this day and age is that you make an investment and then you don't sleep at night because you worry about redundancy as the tech moves fast. What is your view on the evolution of sodium-ion as a potential replacement in a large way for lithium in applications where it makes sense? For example, static energy, or three-wheelers, two-wheelers, where you don't really need torque, or you're more about distance in the last mile. Is that something that's already on your radar, and you're looking at your investments and seeing how you might be able to integrate sodium?
I think sodium kind of falls in that category for us that's like beyond 3 to 5 years. I know there's some people going a lot more aggressive behind it. I think where I see sodium kind of fitting in, I think the first thing a little bit concerning to me is that, in theory, it's great. Sodium's cheaper than lithium, and it should bring down costs. It should, at the cost of a little bit of energy density. But I think one thing that's a little bit we're looking for, we're trying to see consistency of companies who are investing in sodium or talking about sodium as to, the general characteristics of the chemistry. Like if you look at NMC chemistry, I think now we all more or less know that it's going to be something like 700 to 1500 cycles, depending on how dense you make it. We know the density ranges it'll fit. LFP, similarly, we know cycle life and approximate energy density ranges. But sodium, I think I've seen some very wild variations, which I'm not really able to reconcile at this point of time. And I've also seen extreme variations in the cycle life. So ultimately, if my current hypothesis is that if you can get sodium to be something like around LFP density, even at a less than LFP density, but have extremely strong performance characteristics around cycle life and heat performance, I think it's a definite winner in the longer term for energy storage. Because in energy storage, what do we want? We want kind of a plug and play, forget about it solution, maintenance free. So I can put it in the most remote location, hot or cold, and it's going to work come what may. So if that's a niche, I think sodium will be able to fill very effectively, but I'm not really seeing consistency in the people working on sodium, saying that it will be able to deliver on those cycle lives and energy density.
So Vikram, I want to then talk about pack versus cell. You mentioned how your cell manufacturing investment and capacity will be much more than packing, and that's because a lot of people want to do their own packing. And when we ourselves in this industry watched the evolution, we were scratching our heads because we were seeing two-wheeler companies making two-wheelers, electric two-wheelers, deciding to pack their own cells, and then people making electric rickshaws want to pack their own cells, and then car companies and truck companies, wanting to pack their own cells. And we were our team was in Scania in Sweden 3 weeks ago, and we saw that they are having this huge cell packing line, for their own cells, and it's almost going back to Henry Ford in some ways, for an automotive company to want to go upstream in its value chain and try to control some elements of it, which was something they delevered from for, very aggressively over the last 30 years. We, for a while, watched this under the impression that this is happening because the lead acid industry hasn't stepped up. and there isn't an ecosystem to provide the automotive OEMs what they need. Faster, better, cheaper, more nimble, flexible, and so they've had to do it themselves. Yet, from your perspective, it's actually them now wanting to do it themselves because they want to keep the value themselves. So I'm interested, what's happening here, and what is the long-term evolution going to be?
It's hard to predict, but at least if we look back at history, like you said, once upon a time, it was unheard of. Every automotive, company would want to make their own engines, their own critical components. But then, even engines and transmission, everything is kind of you have primes now, right? Who will make it, they'll co-locate, they'll do whatever you want. But I think over a longer period of time, I do believe that delevering may happen again, where automotive companies are willing to kind of give back some of the space to us on the component suppliers, saying that, why don't you do this for me? Why don't you they'll have their own arrangements. But I think in the short term, a couple of things. I still feel that the positive trend is that cell makers will be independent, because even though you see some pretty significant investments by, let's say Volkswagen Group is doing it on their own, BMW's announced, you have that ACC, a couple of others that are kind of coming up. The fact is the largest capacity is still held by independent cell players, right? CATL dominates the market. I think they're still looking at even a long-term 50% plus market share. You have a lot of players like that. So the top 6 are still independent cell makers. So at least on the cell side, even where you see some OEMs coming in, we've seen like Ford is tying up directly with cell makers for captive plants, but it's still them coming in and putting it. But I think that right now it's because nobody's really able to do it, and nobody's kind of filling that demand or that know-how. That maybe that's why the auto OEMs are kind of being a little bit cautious in doing this. Maybe they think that the value add is not there. The other day, I was talking to my friends over at Log9, and they gave they take a pretty aggressive approach. They said, listen, the only differentiation any EV maker can give is range and charging time, and that's all on me in the pack. So they take an extreme approach that says I can become an OEM easier than they can become a battery maker. So I don't necessarily prescribe to that. I do believe that there's a logic right now that says the simpler the vehicle, you don't have much differentiation to give, right? You can differentiate how fast you charge, how the range, and there's not many other things they're giving. But over a period of time, we've also seen vehicles are getting a lot smarter, right? So especially cars, I think it's going to be a lot more when you start going autonomous, and the entire what happens above the powertrain is going to be the really real unique experience. And maybe over a longer period of time, you'll see that the powertrain, more or less everything will operate the same. I don't think the speed and noise and power, maybe these things will cease to be very important to people. So over a longer period of time, I do believe that these things will start to get back into, we'll have a scope to supply. Two-wheeler and three-wheeler, we have to see. The rule of thumb still says about half the market is open to pack makers. But when we see that they have less value to add above the powertrain, let's say.
How fast you charge was a comment you made. Your company is also playing in the charging space. So you make batteries. You're India's biggest lead-acid battery company. You're now potentially going to be India's biggest lithium company if you get it right and move first and you move fast and you get the quality right. But you're also in other parts of the value chain. Let's talk about that, Vikram. What are the other areas in the value chain for EVs that's on your radar?
So just to kind of going back, the first company actually that was started in the Amara Raja Group is a small company called Amara Raja Power Systems. And at that time, when my grandfather first came back to India, I think he was an electrical engineer who worked on power plants, specifically nuclear power plants in the United States. So when he was walking around some of the generation stations in India, he saw that some of the batteries and specifically the chargers at that time were a little bit, he felt that some of them were a little bit behind the time. So the first product we got into was more of like an industrial charger. And I think since then, we've also noticed, in the group, we always learn, it's unfortunate. Power electronics are an equally critical piece of the total solution, but for some reason it always gets outshadowed by the battery because the battery's more expensive. I think that's the only reason, really. It's not that it's more critical to the total solution. So going forward, we believe that we have to be kind of more of an integrated solutions player. The battery alone kind of only delivers so much value. You have to have the power electronics, you have to have the ability to integrate software controls and bring that entire solution together. So when we see that, some of the simpler examples where we have our largest market in the chargers now is these portable chargers. So every single electric two-wheeler, three-wheeler goes with one of those. It's very small. They range from like 500 watt as the smallest two-wheeler charger up to like 3.3 kilowatt chargers for three-wheeler. This is a full range that we're trying to build, and we're trying to localize this as aggressively as possible. We also see that the most recent revisions to the FAME subsidy, they're going to be a lot more strict, right? Saying that the vehicle itself is not the only part of the solution. Even your critical ancillaries like your charger and all have to be localized. So I think that's the immediate term, that's the biggest market we see. And it's also important that you bring the right level of sophistication to these products. What we found earlier, we were selling more or less a IP20 telecom rectifier wrapped around and put some controls on it, and that's not going to work because it's a roughly used product. It goes into the market. So whatever the customer has tested in a factory ceases to be effective the second that the rickshaw driver puts it on the ground to charge it. Or we've even seen extreme cases where the cord, which is not really meant to be load bearing, they're stretching it as far as possible. It's holding up the entire battery and everything like that. So it needs to be IP67. I think that's a must. And these are not things I don't think government can come and regulate things, but I prefer that just industry learn for itself what's going to be effective and make it work. But this is a product that's mostly imported from China today. So we do feel that maybe in the short term, we also have to be more of like a technical alliance with an established player. But over a longer period of time, this is something we want to completely localize in India. Coming to other future products, I know of course you've made great strides in the DC fast charger, so I tip my hat to you on that. It's a little bit, I would have hoped that market would have grown a little bit faster. The reason these portable chargers are growing a little bit faster is because it's one per vehicle, right? So one vehicle sale, one charger sale. But the larger chargers, DC fast chargers, this is not, I would love if one went with every vehicle, but that would make it obscenely expensive, right? So I think it's taking a little bit longer, but we would like to kind of have some localization on that as well. And while I'm not personally a big proponent of swapping, we do have a couple of designs available in which we can offer the swapping model as well. And maybe I'll just jump the gun. The reason when I look at like swapping versus charging, you've seen certain business models that work, certain ones that don't. If you go to Taiwan, a Gogoro model worked very well, right? It made it very affordable. There's a subscription. But in India, the same model that Bounce tried, it's a great attempt, but it also led to a lot of when ownership is de-linked from the use of a product, people don't tend to take the best care of it. There's no kind of accountability for the health of the battery. I'm not seeing that outside of captive fleets, outside of a very, very highly controlled ecosystem, that de-linking battery ownership from vehicle ownership will be very effective. I'm happy to be proven wrong. In any case, I want to have a solution I can give to the customer, but I would definitely rather prefer for, more available charging, safer, faster charging rather than swapping.
So I'm going to come to the elephant in the room then on clean mobility, and that is the religious argument that happens between electric vehicles and hydrogen. And I'm sure from your perspective, your strategy team has pored over future trends, not just within chemistries and form factors, but also redundancy of lithium in the long term, and what happens when everybody moves to EV and there's an inadequate amount of lithium in the world to service that demand, and therefore what happens with harvesting used lithium, second life, and things like that. But beyond that, of course, is hydrogen, and I'm interested in your view on hydrogen versus electric vehicles.
I think at the risk of crystal ball gazing, because anything really beyond 3 to 5 years, I think my guess is as good as anybody's, even if we're in the industry. In the immediate future, the reason, like I said earlier, our bet is clearly on lithium is because the immediate area where I think you're going to really, really see India emerge as a global leader is going to be this light and local mobility segment. And simply for, if no other reason, we're the largest two-wheeler market in the world, we're the largest three-wheeler market in the world, and maybe one of the few three-wheeler markets in the world. So the critical mass we can build here in that, light local mobility, the fact that e-commerce has taken off so successfully here, digital, business models take off so successfully. This urban light mobility, I think it's going to be what dominates the landscape of India for, at least the next couple of years, the near term. And that's I don't see that going towards hydrogen. If nothing else, not being a technical expert, battery is more convenient. It's when you're not kind of there's no range anxiety because it's urban mobility. You can charge frequently. You can find charging fairly easily. I don't think there's any kind of new system that can kind of beat out charging, and especially when you have portable chargers, ease of access to electrical grid. Where maybe hydrogen, I think, of course, we have to see, because there's plenty of people working on this from the EV side as well. When you start extending ranges, when you start looking at longer, maybe let's say trucking, freight, even long-haul busing, can hydrogen start to win out against EV? My hypothesis at this point in time is yes, but I also believe that building out a hydrogen ecosystem is, as much as we talk about building a charging ecosystem being complex, that's actually relatively easy, because anywhere you go in the country, you already have an electrical grid. It's just about installing chargers and putting the right connections. Building out a hydrogen ecosystem, I think, is infinitely more complex, and hydrogen as a molecule is not the easiest to work with, right? So we're a country that still doesn't have piped gas far and wide, and gas is something that's been easily replicated all over the world, whereas a hydrogen grid, pumping hydrogen from one part of the country to another, at least the people who worked on these projects that I spoke to, it's a nightmare, right? So maybe the fact that we're talking about doing more electrolysis, generating hydrogen where you need it to be consumed on spot, that can be looked at, but that takes a lot longer. So in the immediate future, I don't see hydrogen coming in a very aggressive manner unless we're able to really figure this out. I think the technical complexities of putting a hydrogen grid and ecosystem around the country is much harder.
I'd say we tend to agree with you in our own assessment. Hydrogen will be an economic choice if you are going long. So if you're a train, plane, bus, taxi, truck, going at distances of 1,000 kilometers in that voyage or in the day, then hydrogen starts to become more economical. And then you'll see the hydrogen network develop on those niche routes, whatever they may be. Quite easy for a plane or a train, a little bit more difficult for a car, but easy again for a bus or a truck because it's fleet depots. And so, you're basically hydrogenating, so to speak, the fleet depots. And so it's an easier, closed loop kind of system. So I'd agree with you. It's something over the horizon 4 or 5 years from now, and it'd be interesting to have you back on the show at that time to see which way the market evolved. I'm going to ask you the last question, which is the question we ask all the talent that comes on our show, Vikram. And I apologize for the frivolous nature of this question, but it always does bring about a very pointed and clear answer. And so the question is this: if you, Vikram, had the opportunity to be Prime Minister of India for one day, just one day, and you could make any decision you wanted to facilitate faster adoption of clean and electric mobility in India, what would that decision be?
I would actually take a second look at hybridization, is what I would say, because I think one of the things I said early on was that anything we do as a country, I think we need to look at sustainability. And sustainability is not, everyone wants to talk about the environmental angle, diversity, other things that come in. But my only concern is any new technology, any new solution we bring to this country, can this country be self-sufficient in that and do it over a very long period of time economically? So I do worry that in some areas like cars and all, are we moving to EV in a very haphazard and possibly even leapfrogging before we're ready? I could be wrong, because I am very happy with what I'm seeing on the two-wheeler side, the three-wheeler side, but that's a unique market to India. I would definitely say that I would love to see increasing levels of hybridization. And if I was the government, I would say, just start mandating the emissions norms, right? Don't tell companies how to technically solve problems. Rather, just say, this is how much carbon you're allowed to output. Come up with solutions. So maybe that's a very, idealist answer, but that's what I would do.
Excellent. This has been an incredibly enjoyable conversation, Vikram. You're a very clear-headed leader with very pointed answers, and that makes for a very enjoyable conversation on a podcast. It's going to be very interesting and rewarding, I'm sure, to watch the investment made by Amara Raja come alive in 2025, and I'm sure that the automotive industry is also waiting so that you can relieve some of their supply chain pressures, and for them to be able to comply with local content, as well as not having to deal so much with imports from China and all the headaches that causes in the import supply chain for us in India. Thank you very much for having made the time. Good luck with the investments, and we look forward to having you back on the show soon.
Thank you so much.